You are listening to The Wellness Project, and I'm your host, Des. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you wouldn't mind, I would love if you would leave me a review on iTunes, or you can leave 5 stars on Spotify, or you can do both. Getting positive reviews on my podcast helps it to grow. So if you enjoy listening to this podcast, if you gain a lot of value from it, and you enjoy the conversations, then please take a minute to leave me a review. I would really appreciate it. Wow, it is 2023. Happy New Year. I hope you had a great New Year's Eve, great relaxing New Year's Day. I hope you had a great holiday season. Here we are, January of 2023. I can't believe it. I'm really excited for the new year, but I am also excited that this is season 4 of my podcast. Thank you so much for my longtime listeners that have been with me since the beginning. And thank you so much if you're a new listener, if this is your first time tuning in. I'm so excited to have you here. It's been a great few seasons, so I can't wait to see what's in store for season 4. We're starting off strong with a great conversation. On today's episode, I speak with Dana Frost about chronic illness, what chronic illness is, the growing epidemic of chronic health issues, her own personal journey with chronic illness, and what people can do to heal. I think this is going to be a great conversation and very informative. Please help me welcome Dana. All right, everyone, I am here with Dana Frost. Dana, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today because we're talking about something that we haven't talked about on the podcast so far. So I'm really looking forward to it. Today, we're talking about chronic illness.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation. As you know, chronic disease, if you look at a graph, it's been increasing for decades. Nearly half of Americans are suffering from a chronic disease. And I think it's a pertinent conversation because there's actually hope for people to feel better and to not be so burdened by their symptoms.
Oh, yeah, this is definitely a really important conversation to have. So, to get us started, can you explain what chronic illness is, maybe some of the more common types of chronic illnesses, as well as your own personal journey with chronic illness?
Yeah. So a chronic condition would be considered any physical or mental health condition that lasts for more than a year and causes functional restrictions or requires ongoing monitoring or treatment. So they are among chronic diseases are among the most prevalent and costly conditions in the US. What's really interesting is that even though they're costly, they're actually preventable with diet and lifestyle. So I think that we have this opportunity to shift the course. And this is really done on the micro level, each person becoming individually inspired to shift the course of their chronic condition. I would say chronic conditions would be the first one that always comes to my mind because it's personal to me is diabetes, cancer, hypertension, stroke, heart disease, respiratory diseases, arthritis, obesity, oral diseases, inflammation, anywhere where people are experiencing inflammation, reduced quality of life, any of those conditions that cause those sorts of situations would be considered a chronic disease. Digestive disorders, I think I left out digestive disorders. So I want to make sure I mention that because what I see most often would be digestive disorders. And honestly, that's like the root for many of the chronic diseases. It starts in the digestive system.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. And I know that a lot of mental health conditions actually can cause a lot of digestive issues as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting what comes first. So I think depending upon, a person's framework. So from my framework, the dysbiosis when we're looking at mental health would stem from the microbiome or the community of bacteria in the gut and also trauma. Those are two, from my experience and my study, would be two root causes of mental illness.
Oh, yes. And I don't know if you've read the book, The Deepest Well. It's about the ACEs
Ooh,
scores. And it's really interesting because it talks about these adverse childhood experiences and how they impact our health in the long term.
absolutely. So I haven't read that specific book, but I have read I've done a lot of reading. Donna Nakazawa's work comes to mind first on ACEs. And yeah, if you have your score on adverse childhood experiences, actually, the higher the score, the more likely you are to have a chronic disease.
Yes, it's fascinating. We have such a strong mind body connection to our experiences, even experiences that someone may not even remember as a child could impact their physical health later on in life.
Absolutely. I like to think of that as it's a protective mechanism that's built into our system. Children are vulnerable. They are depending upon the adults and the older people in their life to protect them. When someone experiences adverse childhood experiences, the brain and the neurosystem is very protective. The unconscious mind hides that away in the system, really out of protection for that child, out of the will of the human spirit really is for survival. And so it's protective. I see it as a protective mechanism.
Oh, yes, definitely. And so you have your own story. You've had your own journey with chronic health issues. Is that right?
Yes. So I had a significant health crisis in 2011. And I had gone, about a decade of stress that I felt on a daily basis. The way that I saw it is how most women see it. We don't think that it really is going to impact us, and we set it aside to care for our work, for the people we love in our lives. But the body really does keep the score of all the stress that we experience. So I found myself in 2011. I had actually an accident in my home. I was pitting an avocado. I should give you kind of set the stage. We had lived abroad as a family. We had three daughters when we moved abroad, and then we adopted two children while living in Brazil. We were abroad for 10 years. And so this was after having lived abroad. We were back in the US. My oldest was graduating from high school, and my youngest was, I think, like fifth grade. I had been extraordinarily tired. At that time, I did not have a diagnosis of a chronic disease. What I later learned is that my thyroid numbers were leaning towards Hashimoto's after I had this accident where I cut my finger, ended up in the emergency room, and discovered that actually after many tests and several weeks that I had burned out the electrical conduction of my heart, which is quite unique for someone of my age. It was the first case they had in Chicago for a woman who is 45 to have a burned out electrical conduction of her heart that looks like a 80-year-old woman. That crisis uncovered, although the doctors didn't discover it, I had to go on and do my own research to figure out, why am I still really tired? Why don't I feel different? Even though the pacemaker has been implanted and my electrophysiologist said, you will feel like your old self again. Only I didn't, even though my heart was now pacing appropriately. I still felt incredibly tired. And it took me on this journey of discovering, well, what is wrong? I went to many different specialists, and the endocrinologist discovered that I was pre-diabetic, but she really didn't have any direction. Even, attend this class on diabetes, but that was like the easiest thing, honestly, that pre-diabetic diagnosis that is a chronic disease for all the members on my dad's side of the family. So this is the power. You can have a genetic, your code can be written for a certain condition, but epigenetically, which is the way the genes express themselves, our lifestyle is a determining factor if that gene gets expressed. So my gene was starting to express in my mid 40s. And by shifting my stress response, which is a key component of diabetes, and by shifting my relationship to sugar and eliminating sugar, not eliminating totally, it was definitely a journey. There was an addictive component to my relationship with sugar, but switching slowly, moving away from sugar, I turned that genetic expression off, that chronic disease off. And I can tell you, so it's been more than a decade. I test regularly. I still test myself. I still test my glucose levels. I have a yearly A1C test. I do the insulin test every year, the fasting glucose, and every year it has gotten better. Every year it's improved because every year, essentially, I am building up my own internal terrain, my own resilience by feeding my body with the things that create health. Diabetes is the strongest connection. Hashimoto's is the other chronic disease. My mother has Hashimoto's. And as I said, at that time, that health crisis, my thyroid numbers were moving in the direction of Hashimoto's. I took 2 years really dedicated to my healing journey, like really looking at how do I manage stress, learning new modalities, honing in and understanding movement, and the movement based on what I was experiencing at the time that was optimal for me, which was movement, but not strong exercise because my adrenals were burned out. I see, I want to just mention that I see the adrenal function and this idea of burnout really also this fatigue. Chronic fatigue is another chronic condition that I see a lot of people suffer from. And so that was definitely my case, is adrenal fatigue. So when we look at the diabetes for myself, thyroid disorder, and chronic fatigue, all three of those over the course of 2 to 5 years were turned around. And I would say I felt a lot better, and I would have been satisfied after 2 years, but because I continued down this healing journey, I feel younger now than I did probably 10 years before my health crisis. Because in my 30s, I was raising children, and that's a lot of heavy lifting. I really am a strong component that chronic disease can be turned around with lifestyle.
That's amazing to hear because I know a lot of people, when they get a diagnosis or some sort of medical condition runs in their family, they feel helpless or they feel like there's nothing they can do. And they get pretty upset about the situation, and feel like they're kind of stuck. So I think that's great for people to hear that there is a lot that they can do to turn this around and get their health under control.
Yeah. And, I know that boots on the ground, when you receive that diagnosis, it is incredibly triggering. And I know that it's easy for me on this side of my crisis to make it sounds like it was easy. It wasn't easy. And it really, really have to get your mindset focused on, what do you want? Do you want to shift your symptoms? How do you want to feel? I always ask people, how do you want to feel in 10 years? Know how you want to feel in 10 years, because everything you do today is the determining factor of how you feel in 10 years. Do you want your disease to be more progressed? If you do nothing, I promise you your disease will be more progressed. Even if you go the route of conventional medicine and use the pharmaceutical route, it is very rare that I see people who have gone the pharmaceutical route who feel better in 10 years' time. And that's what the doctors have to give you. Their solution is grounded in pharmaceutical. It doesn't matter what the condition is. It's just very rare that I see that people are better. I do know, like cancer, yes, I see people get better with cancer. But when we're looking at some of the other chronic diseases, I see more success in people who really look at diet and lifestyle, and they really begin looking at, how do I optimize my gut health? What's going on in my gut? How can I optimize it? And what are the lifestyle things that I can shift? And how can I really use food as medicine? How can I eat so that food is meant to be our fuel, so that when I eat, I'm actually fueling my system to function at an optimal state.
Right. Lifestyle is so, so important when it comes to mental and physical health. And I know that you said that you believe that we are in the midst of a modern chronic health epidemic. Why do you think that is?
Well, you can just look at the numbers. I mean, I think that the numbers really speak for themselves. I want to say it's like almost a $10 billion industry when we're looking at servicing chronic diseases, when we're looking at almost half 50% of our population suffering from a chronic disease, to me, that is an epidemic. If you compare that to the numbers, 50 years ago, we didn't have those numbers 50 years ago. You can look at a chart and just see that chronic diseases are on the rise, and they have been for several decades. So I feel like you just don't have to look very far to see that we do have an epidemic of chronic diseases.
And what do you attribute to this rise in the chronic diseases and these diagnoses? Where is this stemming from? Do you have any ideas?
I do. I think that it's multifaceted, honestly. So let me just give us the framework of the way that we're living from the modern perspective, where, especially if you just consider the past 2 years post-pandemic, one, we have the most assault when we think about media, toxins. You don't have to look very far to realize our exposure to toxins, whether it's through the air, through food, through the mold in our buildings. Because we have airtight buildings, there are more toxins inside. We spend more time inside. So I think it's exposure to these things that really are not supportive of optimal physiology and nor optimal mental health. So there's a barrage of onslaughts, and they come from being separate, so the things that we're exposed to, but also just not having the same sort of community that we've had in past decades. So there's that element as well. If we look at anxiety is on the rise, and these mental health conditions, they're interrelated with our physical health. And so why are those things happening? I think it's our modern way where we're not as connected to nature. So the body recognizes nature. When we go outside, when we find ourselves near fresh water, when we find ourselves in the middle of a forest, when we find ourselves near plants, actually, even when we find ourselves with other humans, because humans are nature, they are the essence of nature as well. Nature recognizes nature, and the system is bolstered and supported when there's greater contact with nature. Our contact with nature has diminished through the decades. So I think that's a part of it. We are more sedentary than we've been in previous generations, going back multiple generations. I think that's a part of it. Our dependence on substances, I think that is a part of it as well. I don't think it's just one reason. An inflamed body is a body saying, my immune system is in overdrive and I need attention. So there's inflammation that is the sign that something isn't right. But the inflammation, it's actually not the root cause. Why is there inflammation? That's what we want to uncover.
Anyone you talk to, you ask how they're doing, they'll say, oh, I'm just so burnt out. I don't know that we were meant to live the way we're living right now. We wake up early before the sun rises half the time. We sit in an hour of traffic to work. And then a lot of us are in buildings with no windows. And then we leave work and it's dark out and we drive an hour home. And I think that, I don't know, like you said, we're so sedentary. We're not connected with nature. We're not connected with each other. I don't know that we were meant to live this way. And I think it's weighing down on a lot of people, this lifestyle. And I know that COVID was so hard for so many people, but so many people were thriving. They were working from home. People got into gardening. You really couldn't go in buildings anywhere. So a lot of people were getting in nature, hiking. I think they said that it was the time where the most national parks were ever visited. Yes. So people were visiting national parks. People were really getting outside. And now a lot of these companies, these corporations, these businesses, they're telling people you have to come back to work in the office, and people don't want to. They want to be home. That people were cooking, they were eating healthier. So I think that a lot of people got more connected with their families, with nature, and had that idea of, what do I really want? As you mentioned, what do I really want from my life? Who do I want to connect with? And I think people started getting those answers, and it didn't really look like how they were living and how our society is set up. And I think that's a real struggle with people right now, because as you said, with chronic illnesses are on the rise, mental health conditions are on the rise. As you said, anxiety is on the rise, depression is on the rise, suicide attempts are on the rise. So I think that now that we've kind of realize that we're not living within our values, people are really struggling because I think a lot of people feel trapped and feel stuck in that.
Yeah, I think those are really good points that you bring up about the pandemic. I think that it's a complex situation because anxiety was rising pre-pandemic, and I think it hit a peak. I can't say that it's peaked out during the pandemic because people are still anxious, but I do believe there were several different narratives playing out during the pandemic. And I think that one was, and it's, we really want to honor that there were families having dinner together around a table. And there, people were cooking, and there was an explosion in gardening. I love to cook, so cooking wasn't new to me, but how many people started their sourdough starter during the pandemic and baking things for, baking items were running out in the grocery store. And yes, you are right. The national parks hit an all-time high, and they continue to be more visited now than before the pandemic. So I think that was playing out. And simultaneously, isolation was playing out as well. Depending upon the environment where you were experiencing the pandemic, that really dictated if you were able to thrive or if you were not able to thrive, if you didn't have a support system in where you were isolated. So I think that we have these different experiences, and I don't think the answer is definitely not to go back to how we were living. That's not sustainable. I think we have to carve a new path. If we're thinking about what's really going to help turn the needle on chronic diseases, it's not going back to the way we were. And it's also not isolating. I really believe that as humans, we are designed to be in community and in proximity to one another. So I think that's important to, how do we get community and be in proximity and not work in isolation? Because working in isolation is not supportable. And even asking parents to, shoulder the burden of education and hold down, be a two-income earning family, is not sustainable. I want to touch on something that you said, we're not designed to live this way. It's so easy to see what our design is because our mind body system, it's actually regulated, the default is set to regulate with nature. We have a built-in circadian rhythm that actually thrives if we rise when the sun rises. So we've got to go back to see what was life like before electricity. And that's not to say electricity is wrong, but how we know what is optimal is rising with the sun and slowing down when the sun goes away, and actually dimming the lights when we begin to lose natural sunlight, dimming the lights in the home and allowing the body to sync up with nature, with the rise of the sun and the setting of the sun. It's simple, but it's something that I think is really valid for each person to begin to kind of think, how do I set my circadian rhythm so that I'm in sync with nature? And some of us work in the middle of the night, so that's not possible. But I want to tell you a story. I had the founder of a company, Viva Rays, on my podcast. He told me his own health journey, and it's so interesting. He grew up in Canada, in Toronto, a lot of education, but he always had a lot of chronic health conditions. He barely manage them, as he was a child, teenager. Fast forward, he goes to college, and his whole system really just freaks out. It's a full blown, he's now having anxiety when he's in college, and really the physical has now also become mental health. The physical struggles he has mental health struggles. He went away on I think it was a college trip. I don't think it was outside of his college, but he went away for a week to work on a farm. And it was working on a farm where there was, they really did rise with the sun. They kept the lights low, and they were outside working, physically working. So then they were really tired at night. And so what he noticed, all of his symptoms disappeared when he was living in that environment. He went for a bookended period of time, and he noticed all of his mental health challenges and physical issues were no longer being experienced. He, from an engineer mind, became very curious about that. When he went back to school, they all came back. the symptoms came back. He started studying this from a engineer's perspective, and he designed Viva Rays. They're glasses that actually have a prism of light. It's not just blue glasses. It's not just blocking blue light. They actually mimic the different prisms of light that from nature as the day and evening progress. So there are day ones and evening ones, and there are glasses that you can wear that help you adapt to the modern way that we're living, that's not in sync with nature from a light perspective. He really radically changed his life because he realized that that dictates where he lives and what he does. And obviously he founded this company. So I share that because I think sometimes we really need to know there are answers to these chronic diseases. I had another lady on my podcast recently, 20 years ago. She had a surgery, a very easy surgery, not problematic at all. She had a sling put in for the bladder, a bladder sling put in. She ended up being very sick after the surgery and got to the point where her mom and her husband had to take care of her. She couldn't hold her head up. They did a last ditch effort to try to shift her health. And they went in and decided to remove the sling. And they didn't even know if she would survive the surgery. She was that sick. They realized that the sling that they had used was an off-market sling, and it was full of mold. Mold had penetrated her entire body. So they removed the sling. They were using titanium and they thought it was inert. They realized that titanium was an issue. They removed the titanium. She began to get better, but through studying and through the assistance of a nurse that she knew who had been trained by a physician, an older physician, magnesium, this very special pure form of magnesium, she was encouraged to soak her feet in this magnesium, and her health dramatically started turning around. She was completely magnesium deficient due to the mold exposure and toxicity. And so obviously she was detoxing from the mold and doing all that. But what she said after detoxing, what really turned the corner for her was this magnesium. That led her to start her own company where she provisions this very special form of magnesium. It can really make a huge impact on chronic diseases. But you see, we're really up against this system the healthcare system that is predicated on profit.
Oh yeah, no, those are great. Thank you for sharing those stories. I think it's so important that you mentioned that too, that we're up against so much when it comes to our mental and physical health. And when it comes to mental health, there's so little help out there. There's wait lists for therapists. And even if you eat healthy food, there's chemicals, and that we're just up against so much when it comes to our mental and physical health. So I like how you mentioned that too. You brought up that now that we're kind of post COVID, we realize we can't go back to how we were. It's not sustainable. Unfortunately, a lot of people are going back to how we were. And I like how you mentioned that we really need to carve new paths for ourselves. So, how do you recommend that somebody can carve a new path for themselves? And what do you think are some tools that people can use to help them be healthier and live a healthier, happy, and satisfying life?
I like to keep it really simple because I really believe, so this is mindset. We have to get our mindset in the direction that's going to allow the mind-body system to heal. A belief that inside of you, you've got to bring it to yourself and make it very personal. Inside of you resides the potential for healing. We are built with an immune system. It's how we are created, with an immune system that is designed to work for us and help us heal and be well and thrive and feel vitality. Keeping it very simple, let's just slow it down to our breath. My slant towards the breath is born from my own need to connect to the breath and seeing it as truly the original coaching tool. When we look at the breath, the first thing we do when we come in, when our soul comes in as a human, it's the last thing that the physical body does when we leave, when the soul leaves the body. And when we look at all ancient languages, the word for breath is always connected to soul. So when we turn our attention to our breath, we are literally turning and connecting the body and the soul. It sounds so simple, but it's powerful. This is the power we have to begin to turn our attention to the breath and start shifting our nervous system from fight and flight to rest and heal. And we can do that through the breath. I would love to share with your community the 4 qualities of a healthy breath. And this is from the work of a functional doctor. I feel like he's the father of functional medicine, Dr. Andrew Weil. The 4 qualities of a healthy breath are deep, slow, quiet, and regular. And I would invite your community right now, put a hand on your chest and a hand on your tummy and inhale and exhale through the nose. And as you're inhaling and exhaling through your nose, your stomach should inflate and your chest should be calm. Stomach inflate, that's deep. Slow, the breath should move in and out through the nose, and it should be slow, not fast. Fast is fight and flight, and there's nothing wrong with that. If we're running, if we're afraid, if we need to get something done in a hurry, we're going to be breathing quickly. So it's not wrong. It's just that our nervous system is stuck in fight and flight. And so our default is fast breathing. A healthy breath every day is actually a slow breath. So it's inhaling deeply, slowly. It's quiet, meaning no one should hear you breathing unless you have an obstruction. If you have a cold or the flu or a deviated septum, then maybe somebody would hear you breathing. But if you don't have those conditions, your breath should be quiet. No one should be able to hear it. So it's deep, it's slow, it's quiet, and it's regular. The inhale and exhale are roughly the same. And so you'll have people say, oh, 5 breaths per minute. Most people are not going to be able to do that. So I encourage people, feel with your hand on your belly and your hand on your chest, feel what feels doable so that it doesn't make you anxious. Is it an inhale, 1, 2, exhale, 1, 2, inhale, exhale? Is it 1 count, but a slow 1 count? Is it 2? You can move up to inhale 5 and exhale 5, but for most people, that's going to feel belabored, and we don't want that rhythm to feel belabored. So deep, slow, quiet, regular, that's the healthy breath every day, in and out through your nose. Your breath, it's free, and you have to do it all the time. So we can move ourselves out in fight and flight simply by coming to our breath. And sometimes we don't have control over our external conditions, and we need to be able to regulate our nervous system regardless of what our external circumstances are. So I turned to HeartMath, and HeartMath is a research institute in California. They've been researching heart rate variability as it is connected to the breath and the nervous system for decades. So they have their heart-focused breathing technique. And that's just visualizing the inhale and exhale to flow to and from the heart center. So this is a visualization. You're tapping into the energy of your heart that is exponentially stronger than the energy that flows from your brain. So you're moving down into your heart, visualizing the inhale and exhale to flow to and from the heart center. Then you can add on HeartMath techniques, the inner ease technique. With the feeling of inner ease, visualize the inhale and exhale to flow to and from the heart center. And I will just leave it at those. I don't want to give too many, but that's a great place to start. You can have that intention when you're commuting to work or before you start your day, where you sit down and you get quiet with yourself, close out your phone, shut your computer, turn the music off, and you just sit with yourself. You focus on your breath, you turn your eyes inward, purpose the breath to be deep, slow, quiet, regular. Write that on a note card, return to that throughout the day, train that breathing cycle as your healthy breath, and then begin to just train, focusing, visualizing inhale and exhale to flow to and from the heart center with the feeling of inner ease. You can neutralize triggers with that. I would really start with that. And then I would look at, we're all different. So do an inventory of, are you hydrated? Water, like healthy, structured water water that is clean. The body is 70% up to 70% water. The brain needs water. The brain needs fat. So what does the body need? The brain needs fat and water. The body needs water. So are you hydrated? And are you eliminating? These are just some of the things that come to mind that are touch points to be thinking about. If you're not eliminating fully 1 to 2 times a day and you're not sweating, not having opportunity to sweat, your body is not getting rid of toxins. You're not even eliminating the food if you're not eliminating 1 to twice a day. These are like really simple places to start. So you may want to look at, okay, what am I eating? And how can I maybe shift from some of the processed food, and where can I bring in some whole food, some whole vegetables? And the mindset is so powerful. I wouldn't get caught up and, too focused on, I'm a victim, it's so terrible out there. Really focus on how you want to feel and what are the small steps you can do every day to support that. If I think about the amount of toxins we're exposed to, it could be very overwhelming. But more, I just want to focus on what can I do to support this beautiful body, mind system that I have while I'm alive.
That's such great information for people and a really great place to start. Thank you so much for leading us through that breathing exercise. Dana, this has been such a great conversation. Can you share with everyone where they can find you and your podcast?
Yes. So my podcast is called Vitally You, Feeling Younger, Growing Older. You could find it just by searching Vitally You. And it's on anywhere where podcasts are available. You'll find the podcast. I'm most active on Instagram, Dana Frost, Vitally You. I have a website. It's Dana Frost. Yeah, those are the places that you can find me.
Oh, great. Everyone, I'm going to have all those links in the show notes, so make sure you go check out Dana. Dana, thank you so much for being here with me today and sharing all these important points with our listeners today and having this important conversation.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure. And thank you so much for having me as a guest.
I hope you gained a lot from this episode. Dana had so much valuable information, as well as things you can do today to improve your mental and physical health. If you've been struggling, I hope that you can take some of these ideas from Dana and implement them into your own life. Thank you so much for being here today. If you are not already, I encourage you to become a part of my Facebook community. I'm in there every day with more mental health and wellness content. That is facebook.com/groups/according to Des. And I also encourage you to get on my email list, where you will get more mental health and wellness information and content. You will also be the first to know about my latest blogs, my latest podcast episodes, and what products I'm launching. So definitely join my Facebook community as well as my email list, and you can follow me on Instagram at The Wellness Project with Des. I will have all those links in the show notes. As you know, I am currently doing bi-weekly episodes. I hope you have a great 2 weeks, and I will see you in 2 weeks with another incredible guest.